All right. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the dungeons, the new midnight dungeons to be more specific. We're not going to be in this video talking over any of like the returning dungeons like Algathar Academy or Skyreach because we've already covered that in a previous video. I'll be giving updates as beta continues to progress as we get closer to the launch of Midnight. So in this video, we're going to talk about Nexus Point Xenas, the newly reworked Magisters Terrace, Windrunner Spire, and Maisara Caverns. So I want to talk about just kind of nerd out over everything from what I like, what I don't like, the bosses, the mobs, and what some of the general strategies are kind of like starting to formulate as these groups are starting to push on beta. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off, we are going to head into Nexus Point Xenos, where I had the luxury of running with Vikman and Terrathal. And so this is going to be a plus 16. Now, Nexus Point Xenos, there's things that I really like about the dungeon, and there's things that I really dislike about the dungeon. So this is a shorter 3-boss dungeon, which I think most players will enjoy. You have the option to either go left or go right at the start. You're going to progress the hallway with various different trash pulls, some casters, some tank busters, some group damage, and you're inevitably going to get to one of the bosses, where once you defeat it, you'll head back and then head down the other hallway. So at the start of this dungeon, you do have a little bit of choice, but once that choice is made, and I realistically, once there is a meta confirmed for what's a better lust pull for most groups, it's pretty much going to be linear. Anyways, in this run, we ended up going left. Now, you could pull trash in this front room, or you can end up skipping some of that trash, saving it for later, and just running down one of the hallways. Now, I do like the idea of being able to pull big at the start. What I don't like is how far you have to run to get this pull set up. We're in combat for almost 20, if not, yeah, about 20 seconds or so before the group actually gets gathered. And a lot of these mobs are going to get blown up almost immediately based on the damage profile of our kit. Now, what I do really like about this dungeon, though, is despite the pull taking a while to get set up, just because of how far you have to run, the pull itself is actually pretty easy. There's a couple of casters, and when I say couple, I mean there's one. There's a couple of guys hitting the tank. There's a dot that goes out, but it's really, really easy to control. And honestly, if you have like one dedicated melee player or your tank or your whoever, well, not a healer, obviously, you can just assign a kick and you're pretty much going to be good to go. As you move deeper into this Core Spark engine way, which is the left side of the dungeon, the big scary mob here is going to be the Circuit Seer. They do a ton of group damage that kind of like ramps up, and they just kind of blow up your group, and they start dropping pools on the ground. And this is obviously going to create a kind of these like void zones that are going to limit the amount of room that you have to work with unless you continue pulling or you pull backwards. So the most efficient thing to do is to keep pulling forwards and pulling mobs onto this, but it is extremely scary for the tank. Anyways, once this pull eventually does end up going down, the rest of the trash that you're going to see in here are pretty much the same. The last thing I really wanted to like highlight are the engineers who, when they die, they drop a like explosive barrel that needs to be killed before you kind of move on. So as long as you do that, you're going to be pretty much set. Now, for the most part, even if you don't have a ton of coordinated kicks, there aren't a ton of casters in this hallway, which is super nice. In most pulls, you might have one, maybe two. And if you have two, a couple of bolts going off here and there isn't going to be the end of the world unless you have a Circuit Seer. Now, moving on to the first boss, I've talked about this in a previous video when I think I did like my 15 or 16 kind of like walkthrough. This boss is really boring, at least for a tank player. The boss kind of just spams this arcing zap that seems to always target the tank. So a strong tank who's good against magic, or really realistically any tank, honestly, you can let the cast go off. It doesn't really hurt that much. And the only scary part of the fight is the knockback and healing absorb, except there's no kind of pressure to get the healing absorb off until the next damage event, which happens like 30 seconds apart. And so this fight is really, really chill. But unfortunately, you have to kill all the trash almost pretty much leading up to the boss. So when you do get here, it's really difficult to pull trash onto the boss unless you do some kind of like weird back pulling or you skip through. Anyways, once the absorb does go off, you can see that there's like a little bit of ticking damage from the absorb. But for the most part, it's not like super, super, super lethal. And then I think the fight's kind of engaging from like a DPS or healer point of view when you have to disable the beams, but because from a tank's POV, you don't end up disabling anything, and it kind of feels like shit that you just kind of sit here forever. But yeah, the fight's pretty simple. I don't mind it, I just think it's kind of boring. Now, once the boss does go down, you're going to end up channeling this conduit, which will then allow you to actually like kind of fly back to the start of the dungeon, where you'll then go down the other path. Now, you could have gone right first, and then in that case, you would be going left. But in this video that I'm going to be showcasing, we're going to be going to the right second. Similar kind of pull cadence. We're going to have to actually grab these defenders and like book it. Like we have a far way to run, which again, you don't have to do this, but it obviously makes sense to pull big, especially with people who blast and have CDs and all this stuff. Anyways, most of the mobs in this area don't feel like they do much. Like a lot of these smaller mobs, there might be a cast here or there. It's these heralds that you want to look out for. They do this dark beckoning channel, and these lines are really hard to see in my opinion, but they send out like little ghosts, and if you get hit by the ghosts, you're gonna take a lot of damage, so you don't want to do that. The other major mechanic in this area are these smudges. These smudges are kind of making their way towards the hosts. You want to stop them before they get to the hosts. You can eventually like stun them, knock them back, etc. And they transfer their health into that mob. If it does become active, you have to deal with it. I don't know if it gives percent because I've never had one actually activate in a Mythic Plus run, but it can be pretty scary. Anyways, kill the casters. There is this one tank buster mob, this Null Sentinel, that does the Nullwark Blast, which targets the tank and then does like a big, it looks like a frontal, but I don't think it's ever clipped anyone. I think it only hits the tank. And then Dread Bellow is going to be some AoE damage. It's going to do a little bit of damage to the group and then apply a pretty nasty dot. So healers want to be prepared for this. The rest of the trash in this hallway is actually, I think, easier to deal with than the left side, the kind of the core way, which whatever thing we did first. Now, when you do get to the first or second boss in this case, there is like this little gauntlet you have to take care of. There's 3 waves of ads you have to kill. Now, I've complained about this in my last video where I kind of went more in depth. Basically, I just don't like this kind of like RP forced trash pulling stuff. It's not the end of the world. It's not the worst thing. Like flying RP is objectively worse, I think. I don't know if that's objective, if it's a subjective comment that I'm making, but being forced to pull very specific packs in a specific order and having this like time gated moment in a key where you can't do anything kind of sucks. Now, I could go and pull more trash onto this like area if I really wanted to. So I'm kind of complaining just to complain. That's probably my only, it's one of my gripes with this dungeon. Anyways, once you get all 3 waves down, you will eventually be able to take on the second boss, which is the Core Warden Maisara. This boss is actually really fun, in my opinion. So she does I think it's like every element of the boss fight is done really well. So there is a tank buster that does a fair bit of damage that the tank needs to be cautious of. And there's also ads that spawn. And so the overlap for the tank specifically has like, it's different every time where like you might have the tank buster by itself and then you have to tank the ads by themselves. Or sometimes you have them overlap where like there's the boss tank buster and the ad tank buster and you have to use like a major defensive there. Or an external or whatever. Also, ads, good for funnel, good for just like doing big dam and feeling good as a DPS. So I think it's like pretty well done. Also, the teleport mechanic that the boss does. There's been fights in the past where the boss might jump to a target, and that feels bad because melee or whoever might lose uptime, a range might lose uptime because it might jump behind them. But in this case, they do it really nice where it might target a player, the boss like echoes onto their location, but the boss model doesn't move. And so this boss is great. And then on top of all of this, you get like a 200% damage amp during the burn phase, which is again really fun. And yes, the boss has a lot of health, but because of the damage amp, and there's no like absorb or shield, I think the Rookery dungeon is a dungeon that I've talked about in the past where like that design philosophy for the Voidstone monstrosity was terrible because hitting into an absorb sucks to get a damage amp. This boss just getting a damage amp every like 45 seconds or whatever it ends up being feels really, 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 really good in my opinion. So I think this is a great boss. I think a lot of players are going to have fun on it. Healers are going to be able to pump. As you can see, Vikman was going into cat form with Convoke during the burn and just like doing insane damage. So, of course, on this side, similar thing, we're going to click on this conduit, take it back to the start. And then I made a little oopsie here and I accidentally started pulling. So once you finish both sides, you want to like channel the like little conduit up here, which our survival hunter like pinged. I kind of accidentally pulled, not thinking about it. So we're going to do this pack first, but then we're going to actually go back up to the console and we're going to channeling into the core access power, which will open up the bridge down to the final boss encounter space. And you're going to see like pretty unique light infused mobs here. So you have the lingering images, which you've already dealt with up to this point once in the dungeon. Tank buster, slight frontal, and then like a dot. So pretty chill. Couple of fixating mobs, the bats. When they die, they explode and heal mobs inside of their circle. I think if they're not CC'd, and then or purged or something. And then there's a couple of casters. Very easy last area, take it a pull at a time. The dungeon timer in here feels pretty lenient for how quick at least we were. The last boss does take a while though, so keep that in mind. And then finally, you're going to be on Lothraxian, who very simple mechanics. Basically, it's Tank Buster, similar to all the ads you've already dealt with. Then he kind of dashes at 3 players, leaving a dot, leaving images behind. The images then dash across. So it's like, you know, just spread out, dodge, pretty chill. And then he does this like intermission where he swaps places with one of the images, and you have to figure out which one is him. Now you figure it out based on if the image has horns or not. If it has horns, it's fake. If it doesn't have horns, if it's a bald man, it's him. Now the problem with this is that if you ping the boss right before he like swaps places, the ping will follow the mob, and then you know exactly who to kick. I hope Blizzard fixes this because this is terrible. It kind of nullifies the difficulty of the fight, because the difficulty should be, and I think what would be fun is if you had to figure it out. Because if you kick the wrong thing, it's also that's a whole other issue. If you kick the wrong ad, you just like instantly group wipe. So I get the ping thing, but I think the fun part about this fight is figuring it out. And I wish maybe if they were able to figure out to cancel the ping, it would make hunters useful because of Hunter's Mark, or they need to just like remove the ping and then like reduce his health by like 20%, because this guy takes a long time. I think in the log I have of this key, and if I can find the logs, I'll leave them down below, but this was a 5-minute fight, which is kind of crazy, or like 4.5 or something. So anyways, we pinged and the ad is like really, really far. When they are stacked up, it's a little difficult to figure out, or like you want to make sure you target the right one basically, but yeah, pretty easy fight. Anyways, that was Nexus Point Xenas. Overall, I think it's a good dungeon. There are some glaring issues with it. I think like Circuit Seers are like really, really nasty. I think the first boss is really boring. Second and third boss are good, but I think Lothraxian needs a little bit of a update to at least I want the ping not to work. I think it's cheating. I think it's stupid. I like what happens when you forget to ping and then no one knows what they're looking for and then you just wipe. Like, terrible way to brick a key. Anyways, yep, that was Nexus Point. Moving on to Magisters Terrace. Now, this is a dungeon that has really been growing on me. The pulls in here end up actually being pretty good. I think they've made some good adjustments to both the bosses and the trash in here. There's not a ton of casters, so there can be. There is one mob that I'll get to later that I really, really, really hate, and I hope Blizzard changes them or nerfs them. But you're going to start off the dungeon by finishing off or killing this pack of 5 at the start, which will unlock this doorway, which leads you into this hallway of a couple of casters. I recommend going all the way down to the end. It's pretty easy to do it in one pull. You have some Magisters casting like Polymorphs and Arcane Bolts. You have some guys meleeing your tank, applying debuffs to your party. Pretty chill for the most part. When you move past this pack, you'll actually head down into the library. So for anyone who remembers Magisters Terrace but like doesn't remember Magisters Terrace, or is very fond of Magisters Terrace back from BC, it is nowhere close to the same dungeon. It is a very different instance now. Basically, we're moving through like the back rooms of Magisters Terrace. Anyways, these codexes, I forgot, someone fucking grammar policed me in my last video, but these codexes. Wait, actually, you know what? Fuck it, I'm gonna look this up. The correct plural of codex, strictly dictionary version, is codices. 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 Codice. Yep, that's it. Thank you for that. GG. They do random group damage. Pyromancer does like aura damage with ignition and does basically like a little ground, like a flame strike. You'll want to move out of this, and then they do a pyroblast, which you'll need to kick. Pretty chill. Moving into like the next area, there's a couple of casters in this room, but you could also opt not to pull the casters, which is what I'm going to end up doing here. So we're going to grab these like enforcers and stuff and pull them onto this big sentry who just does like a channel and roots the tank. Moving into the first boss room, you're going to have a lot of like worms to deal with that give you a damage amp when you kill them, but they also do a little bit of burst of damage. You have some pyromancers, you have some of these like little sentry guys, you have some of these enforcers that we've seen before, and the magister as well. Once you get onto the first boss, it's a pretty chill fight, though I think this boss kind of can get like glitched out or bugged out by positioning it properly or improperly. The fight's pretty simple. Basically, he does a tank knockback, he leaves a poop on the ground, and then he does like a little channel phase. During the channel phase, if the tank puts him into a corner, it seems like the orbs can only spawn. They have to spawn. It's basically like there's conditions, right? It has to be able to spawn at least like 5 or 10 yards away from the boss. It's like checking for eligible locations. Now, unfortunately, and fortunately, I think if it fails to meet that requirement for an eligible location, it just doesn't spawn the orb. And so if you can get the boss into like a very specific corner of the boss encounter space, you can essentially minimize the amount of orb soaks you need to actually do, which I think I might end up showing a little bit later. If I have footage, I'll show it. So it's like a bad tank will make this fight really hard for your group, but a good tank and good positioning will completely nullify the difficulty of this boss entirely. So I'm not quite sure if Blizzard's going to end up updating this, except I don't know what update they could make. I mean, outside of the fact that they could just spawn more orbs, if it checks for a location and it doesn't find one, it would just spawn it in a new location or something. But I think there was one set that we ended up doing, and we only ended up spawning like 4 orbs or something like that, compared to like the 20 that you're supposed to soak normally. And so as you can see, I kind of put them into the corner here. And outside of a few orbs that we end up soaking, and the very strange pathing of those other orbs in the corner, as you can see, there's like no more orbs, as you like right here. Yeah, so we got pretty lucky. It's like checking for locations probably on the other side of the boss, which just don't exist because we're up against a wall. And we soaked, I think, a total of 4 orbs there, which is or 5 orbs or something. So yeah, I'd imagine Blizzard might update this fight. If they don't, it's fine. It's just going to mean that a good tank will have a bigger impact than a bad tank. Moving on from this boss, the spell breakers going down to the second boss are really, really, really nasty. You're going to take this area probably pretty slow. They apply a really nasty bleed, which is not fun to deal with. And they are also like, there's some magisters and some guys who teleport. There's some dots that go out. This is a very healer heavy hallway, and your DPS want to be very like aggressive with using their defensives whenever they do have a debuff, because it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt a lot. So you're going to dispatch a couple of different packs and different like variations of these mobs. The last pack has 2 spell breakers, which is pretty scary. And then you have a little bit of boss spawning RP before getting into it. Now, luckily, this is a good time for your healer to sit down and drink, because this is also a fight that is going to require a fair bit from your healer. Now, Sunlash, very straightforward. He applies a dot, he drops a suppression zone, and then players have to clear their dot by walking into the suppression zone circle. Now, when you drop your stack, it applies a dot to your group. If you drop them too quickly, your healer might get overrun, but you want to drop them. You don't want to take too long to drop them, or you're going to get overrun by debuffs, and it's just going to not end up being very good. So the ping system is really good for this. Also, there is like a general order, right? Like tank should go last, healer should go first, and then tankier DPS should like wait a little bit, and like squishier DPS should probably drop pretty quickly. And so if players are aware of how other classes work, you can kind of like plan around that. Dropping 2 at a time, though, not a big deal. And then finally, he'll do Vow of Silence, which will remove the circle and silence any player who isn't already silenced, or whatever, who's in the suppression zone. And so basically you step in last second, you don't get silenced, and then you're chilling. And it's this constant repeat. I've talked about this in my Magister video that I just did, but basically I would love it if they made it so the runic mark always went on the tank for sure, because it's really cringe when it goes on DPS over and over and over and over again. They run out of defensives, and then they eventually bleed out, which I have had in runs. You can kind of like high roll or low roll this dot. And since there's no tank buster, it would just make sense to put it on the tank every time. That's my only feedback here. Outside of that, we're good. Boss goes down, and then we are channeling this, like we're draining the shield. Once the shield gets drained, it'll spawn all of the void monstrosities, and basically instead of coming through the dungeon like we have in like a linear fashion, we're now working our way backwards. And it's pretty good. This entire hallway is pretty easy to pull. There's a couple of casters, a couple of like random AoE like teleport mobs that are going to like teleport and hit one of your DPS. Besides that, you're going to pull really, 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 really big. Terathal's going to blast, and then you're absolutely fucking chilling. Now, moving forward, you're going to have these like two big Void Caller mobs. There's a Shadow Rift Void Caller, and then there's like a Devourer or something, which I'll point out. This guy is super easy. He just spams summons ads and does some AoE damage. Basically, just like use the ads to funnel into him, and you're good. The Void Infusers are really scary. They cast a fear. If you get feared, you're probably going to group wipe, which is never fun. And then you're going to see like a variation of these mobs. You got to have some guys who teleport. You have the guys who cast fear. You have some of these like Blueberry Void Walkers who cast Shadow Bolts. Very chill. And finally, we have the Devouring Tyrants. Now, this guy is an absolute joy to tank. He does this thing called Devouring Strike, which applies, I think, more than a full health absorb shield to tank players. It's like 700k healing. Now, some tanks are fairly good at this. Brewmaster, Prot Warrior, Guardian Druid, I felt like didn't have a horrible time with it. Blood DK, Prot Paladin, and like Vengeance Demon Hunter on the other hand, Vengeance actually was fine, but like those two tanks specifically, terrible. My hope is that Blizzard either makes it like a group soak where it splits the absorb up so you can like choose to have the tank solo it, or like your group can split the absorb, or they need to significantly reduce the absorb or the healing reduction that it gives. Like maybe make it an absorb for 50% of incoming healing instead of like the 100% or whatever it is, because it is extremely oppressive if you're not playing one of those tanks there, and you have to pull them. It'd be fine if you can just like path around them, but you can't. You have to end up pulling two all the time. There's the one to spawn the third boss, and there's one right before the final boss, which you have to clear to get past. Anyways, Jellimus, kind of a weird fight. It's very like how the fight works is basically it summons a couple of two different ads that are just like replicas of the boss, and they're going to repeat the mechanics the boss is doing. They have a shared health, so keeping them stacked is going to be kind of vital for the tank to do for your DPS. And then periodically throughout the fight, they're going to like shoot out pools under players. They're going to try to grab players and pull them towards them, so you're going to have to counter that. And then they do this thing where they do Neuralink, which is going to pair one of the squid jellyfish guys with a player. That player needs to run up to the ad and touch it, run into its hitbox basically to remove the absorb shield. You're on a set timer for that. If you don't do it in time, the mob keeps that absorb shield, which means that you'll lose out on effective damage because it's being absorbed instead of being done to the boss or the ads. So as long as you repeat that, you're good. The boss starts with 2 ads and then we'll eventually move to 4. So everyone will have to deal with the mechanics at some point. But at the start, it's a little RNG. Your healer might be dealing with it. Your DPS might be dealing with it, but it's only 3 players until it eventually moves to 5. It's a fine fight. I don't mind it. I don't hate it. It's better than it was when it originally started. It's a little oppressive for like melee specifically, but that's not really the end of the world. So anyways, when that guy goes down, you're moving on to the final area, which has all of the same trash that we've already dealt with. So you're going to progress all the way up the tower to the final boss. You could pull pretty aggressive with coordinated kicks, but there are a couple of mobs that cast this thing called Void Surge, which will fear your entire group for 3 seconds, which will generally lead in a group wipe if no one can have any actions. Bolts will go off, your tank's getting meleeed in the back, etc. Just be super, super careful. At the very top of once you get all the way up the tower, you'll eventually run into the last Devouring Tyrant that you will have to pull. There's also other ones you could pull, but with how difficult they are for tanks to actually manage, I don't recommend doing it unless you're like super, super confident in your ability. But like Brewmaster felt pretty good. I did it as Blood DK, felt terrible. I've done it as Prop Paladin, feels terrible. It generally leads in like deaths, even though you can AMS and like immune. Eventually, if you don't have a high enough damage and the boss keeps doing it, or the mini boss, you're eventually going to die. Now, finally, we have the last boss of this place, the Gentrius. This is probably the most engaging boss fight of the season, or at least of this dungeon pool. It's very active. Like there's a tank buster, and the healer's constantly dispelling, and whenever you dispel it, it like sends out these orbs that will root players. You obviously don't want to get rooted, because the main mechanic of this fight is like the volleyball boss. You're taking turns in these different quadrants, soaking the circle. If it connects with the ground, it's like just basically a full group wipe. It is recoverable up to like 15. I've seen like healers heal through it with all of their CDs, but like you can't have it happen more than once. So basically you spread out into the 4 different quadrants. You make sure everyone is soaking. The tank generally wants to be on him by himself. As you can see, we just actually missed right there, which I believe we ended up wiping to. So uh W Soken team. But basically, yeah, it's a really fun, engaging boss fight. I think it's very healer intensive. It's just patchwork single target. There's a tank buster, and you have to constantly soak like a little volleyball, which I think is really cool. So yeah, Magisters Terrace, overall a pretty good dungeon. I think the first boss has like a glaring issue with like tank control, and then I think the second boss needs to tighten up its consistency with like runic brands. Like it should always go on the tank, and then it should rotate between like every other set. So it should be like healer and DPS, and then DPS and DPS, and like then you do your whole phase, you drop your thing, and then you go back into it. It's like DPS, DPS, then healer, DPS. They've done this before with like other mechanics in dungeons, whether it's trash mobs or bosses, where things rotate between the players getting picked. So you constantly like know when you should be using a defensive. So if they do something like that, I think this dungeon will actually be one of my favorite out of this select 4 dungeons. But overall, pretty good dungeon. All right, let's move on to Windrunner Spire. Windrunner Spire is, I feel like it's, I like it more than other people like it, which sucks because I think this dungeon is like an absolute vibe. Now, what I like about this dungeon and what I like about some of these other dungeons is outside of Magister's Terrace, obviously, like that one does not start off with a bang, but this dungeon, Maisara Caverns, which I'll talk about shortly, and Nexus Point all start with like these really big pulls that you're lusting, you're using cooldowns on. It's a like high HPS. There's this thing called Arcane Salvo, which happens. This one does a lot of damage to like specific players. You have dispels going out, you have good tank damage, you have a tank buster through the armor reduction, and you have a little bit of movement you have to do because of the arcane wards that these maguses put down. So I think it's like it's not super overwhelming. There's like 2 casters if you decide to pull the entire room. If not, there's like 1 caster per side. And it's just fun. I think being able to pull really big at the start and get all your shit on cooldown is really good. And then you have like a nice cooldown recovery pull after this. So basically, the different maguses block you from going on either side. If you pull a full room, you can head down to left or right. I generally go to Ember Dawn first, which is going to the right side first, or the northern side of the dungeon. A couple of groundskeepers and stewards down here, similar to mobs that we've seen before. And as we progress, you're going to continue seeing a lot of like different groundskeepers and casters. And then when you get into this area, you're also going to see a couple of spiders. When spiders die, they drop poison. Pretty chill. You're also going to see these things called they're the pigeon bird boys that do fire spit. I don't remember the name of them. Firehawks, Dragonhawks, something like that. There we go. Dragonhawks, that's the word. They do a focused kind of like pellet blast. Is like the best way I can describe it. This thing called fire spit. It's going to do periodic damage over the course of its channel. You're going to want to make sure you're stopping this. As we continue down, we're going to have more spiders, more casters, a couple of poisons. And then you're going to get outside, almost approaching the first boss. These groundskeepers will like summon these men, these little flower men, who just allow you to have a ton of funnel and a lot of damage. Like what I like about this dungeon the most is the size of the pulls, but how simple the mechanics are. There's not a ton of casters, there's not a ton of tank busters, there's not a ton of group damage. Like there's um there's like specific predictable group damage. There's an applying like damage amp on the tank, which is just like an armor reduction basically. And most of the pulls have like 1 caster, maybe 2 casters. It's nothing crazy. So I think this dungeon has like a really nice consistent damage palette. Moving on to Ember Dawn, this is kind of a bullet hell boss, which I really, really like. It's basically tank buster, frontal spam, dots that people have to run out, which will spawn tornadoes, and then like this intermission phase, which is just like frontal spam and bullet hell while dodging tornadoes. The funniest part is if you're playing Brewmaster with Fuel on the Fire, you also spawn tornadoes that look exactly like the boss mechanic that players can see. So it will freak them out, and they'll often cause them to run into other tornadoes, and they're going to die. Really good fight. Anyways, once you kill the first boss, you will be able to take a portal all the way back to kind of the starting first room, which will then allow you to progress onto the other side. Now, you could go this side first. You could go to the Derelict Duo first, depending on cooldowns. I don't know what's going to end up being meta. I like to go to Ember Dawn first, personally. I don't know what's going to be better for like lust timings. I think it's easier, or at least quicker, to get to Derelict Duo. in terms of like just how much mobs you have to get through compared to the other side, but I think with less timings, maybe it makes more sense. I don't know. I've seen groups go both, don't know what's going to be meta, but anyways. When you finally get kind of down into the actual hallway, you're going to see groundskeepers fighting against like undead cutthroats. These cutthroats apply a poison to their weapons that you're going to want to try to kick. If they successfully get the cast off, it's not the end of the world. It's not as like oppressive as like the motherload poison blades that would like basically lead to almost a group wipe if they went off. If these go off, it's mostly like a tank dispel, but they might port behind a random player and apply a bleed or apply a poison. If you have poison dispel, great, but if you don't have one, it's not like the end of the world. What I don't like about this side is this side feels like the pull size gets really small. I don't know if there's really a realistic way to pull much larger because these woe bringers just kind of don't move very easily. They kind of spam casts, then they do a channel that you have to break through a shield. I don't like mechanics where you have to like break through shields to stop. I just think it's just like clunky and cringe, and then you're just like you're aware that you're not doing effective damage because now the effective damage is to stop a cast. I'd much rather just make sure you have a kick for an important cast rather than like cast starts, but it can't be interrupted till you break through a 30% absorb shield. Like that's never fun. It's probably like one of my only complaints about this dungeon because I love the rest of this dungeon. Anyways, you have a couple of these like behemoths that just do group damage, and that's pretty much it. Then you'll eventually be onto the derelict duo. This fight has a lot of similar mechanics from previous bosses and past expansions that you'll probably recognize, like from Necrotic Wake, for example, or Waycrest Manor. Moving into the boss fight, though, it's 2-target cleave. The latch is going to do like big tank buster. The caster banshee lady is just going to do like basically bolts you're going to have to kick. Periodically throughout the fight, you just got to spread out, dropping poop on the ground. You want to be a little cautious with where you drop this because you're going to have to move around the kind of this like awkwardly shaped boss room. Tanks can easily stand in the poop to drop to make room more efficient. And then kind of the main mechanic that you don't want to mess up is the Banshee Lady is going to port away, and then Latch is going to do, the big guy, he's going to do heaving yank. That's what I do at night. And you're going to want to like move behind the Banshee. The Callus is, I think, her name. And she is basically you want to yoink her out of her damage effect. If you miss the yank, he's going to do it again, but it's ramping damage. So if you miss, especially in like higher keys, you're probably just like, it's probably a GG go next. But it is recoverable like in like this lower content, like these 12s, these 13s, these 15s that we were doing. And then finally, like the last thing I didn't mention was the Curse of Darkness. You can decurse it to remove one of them, which is super nice, or you can alternatively just CC them. They don't take damage. So I believe or maybe they do take damage. I can't remember. I thought we at some point CC them and then it was like wasn't breaking for some reason. So yeah, just CC them out and you're good. This is a very important encounter to make sure you're getting 2-target cleave and killing these guys evenly. When whichever boss dies before the other, the one that's still alive will get a ramping damage buff. If it's Callus, the caster lady, she'll eventually do her Banshee Wail, but you're not able to yank her out of it, and it'll probably start just one-shotting your group. Her Shadow Bolts, if they're missed, will probably just like one-shot the player who's targeting it. Where Latch, on the other hand, will just start destroying your tank, and then he also spawns, he's the one spawning the pools on the ground, so it's probably going to be like a group one-shot or a tank one-shot, so it's really, 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 really important to make sure you are just like cleaving them super evenly. They want to die within like 1% or 2 of each other in an ideal world. Anyways, after that, you will then head back up, and it's not going to take you all the way back to like the start of the dungeon like we've seen before. It's going to take you just back upstairs to this like first room, where you'll then start clearing down towards the third boss. There's going to be a couple of different like archers and some like just like soldiers here. They don't do much. You just want to be careful of the giant turkey. The turkey charges a random player, try to bait into the wall, keep it nice and close, and then the rain of arrows from the archer, you want to try to stop with some form of CC because it just basically spawns circles on the ground that can be pretty lethal if you don't move out of them. It is dodgeable, but it's also preventable, so prevent it. If you can't prevent it, just dodge. Moving into the final area, there's a little bit of RP to spawn the kind of the horde soldiers, but you're going to have like grunts, wargs, and axe throwers. Grunts don't really do much. They apply a bleed to people. The axe throwers just throw axes, and the warg bites your tank. I believe it's a health reduction or a healing absorb, so you can always bank some healing for that. The last thing to really talk about in here are these mystics. They basically spam chain lightning, and when they get to 30% health, they cast Bloodlust. enraging all of the mobs that are also in combat. So you want to be a little careful as a tank or as just a group whenever the Mystic does hit 30%. It's weird because it's a priority mob, but the priority mob, when it gets to a low health threshold, will buff every other mob, which means that like you want to prio it down, but you kind of don't want to unless you have a soothe. But again, ultimately it doesn't matter. You can kite, you can just prepare for it. You can save some defenses for the end of the pull versus the start, and you should be pretty good. Anyways, this is a dungeon that ends with a back-to-back boss fight, so you want to be at 100% count in this final room. So luckily we're gonna end up killing this pack here. Very similar mobs. You got a Mystic, Axor, Warg, and a Soldier, or a Grunt, or whatever that's called. And then that should put us at 100% count. And we're moving on to Commander Kroluk. This guy is kind of at first I hated him, and now I think he's a really cool fight. He has a pretty nasty tank buster with this rampage. He just starts slamming the tank over and over and over and over again. And then he does this thing called like Quaking Leap, or whatever it's called, Reckless Leap. Now it goes on the furthest player, and I love it when it goes on a predetermined player. So in this case, you can have like a tanky range or your healer go far, and then your tank can run away, and it's like playing a keep away or whatever. The rest of your DPS can just stay in the middle of the room and just fucking vibe. You kind of always want the bleed to go on the tank, because the tank is probably the tankiest. Now you do want to be a little careful because the tank buster is also kind of scary, but if you're confident in your ability to actually take damage, you're chill. Now one other thing that's really cool about this fight is this intimidating shout. So many pugs are going to fuck this up the first time they get here, which is going to be very, very funny. Basically, you have to be stacked with at least one other person, or you get feared for like 4 seconds, which can obviously be problematic if you end up getting caught in like a circle or a swirl or get the leap on you. Anyways, phase happens, I think, at 70 and 40% health, where he becomes immune. He spawns a bunch of ads that we've already dealt with. Basically, they're just like replicas of the trash that we already did. And he's going to spam cast Bladestorm, fixating down a player. That player needs to kite. Everyone else just needs to focus on killing the ads. And now the fight's just going to rinse and repeat. Once this boss ends up going down, we are basically going to take this little like portal all the way up to the top floor, where we are going to face off against the Restless Heart, or I don't know, it's probably like Sylvanas or Illyria, whatever. Now this fight is crazy. This fight has seen like several iterations over the course of like alpha and beta. I don't know if it's going to stay as it is, but it's a kind of a dot management fight. And it's like kind of like a combination of like bullet hell, dot management. But basically the fight starts off with like a tank buster, then she spawns a bunch of arrows, and then these arrows knock you up into the air, and when you do that, it removes your dot. Now the dot stacks up whenever she does something. I don't remember what ability actually applies a dot to everyone, but you're gonna see it. It looks like it's the rain of arrow. Like she'll disengage, call down the rain of arrows, and then when she does that, it applies a permanent dot. You drop the dot by taking one of the arrows up into the air, and when you do that, it leaves a pool of electricity on the ground, and then these circles around players will clear said electricity by spawning these like little orbs. Now, I personally think that these orbs move way too slowly. I just don't think it's a mechanic that needs to exist. I think the fight's already super hectic as it is. I think they could simply get rid of the orb mechanic. I think clearing the electricity circles on the ground is probably a really good thing to do, but the orbs just feel like a little over the top. They're not hard, but it's just like how slow they move. Also, one other thing to note, the boss will always leap to the side of the room that she's furthest from. So the tanks can actually control the positioning of the boss throughout the entire encounter. And why this is important is because when she does phase and she leaps away and spawns like the start of the ring, it clears the arrows on that half of the room. So you kind of want to pull her to the edge of the room that has the least amount of arrows, so it clears almost no arrows, so you have arrows to actually work with. But as you can see clearly, there is a lot of electricity circles on the ground, which is kind of crazy. And then finally, I just want to talk about the tank buster. The tank buster is like this really weird thing where it knocks the tank back really, really, really far. And it makes you take like 200% or whatever, like more physical damage for like 3 seconds, like a very small amount of time. The tank buster itself doesn't necessarily hurt, but it's if you run back to the boss or when the boss runs to you and melees you, like the next melee swing or two is going to freaking destroy you. And so you want to make sure you're using active mitigation during that. So if you have a shorter CD, like that in terms of its duration, use it like after the hit, But if you have like a long CD that lasts for like 8 seconds or 10 seconds or something, like Shield Wall is a great example, or Fortifying Brew, you can use it early. But some of the like shorter CDs, you might want to like try to use at the very last second, just so it actually lasts for the full duration of the dot or the debuff. So yeah, basically drop your stacks at 1. Don't wait until the ring comes out, because the healer's going to be busy trying to like move and like position and everything like that. It's just like not a good time. So drop your stacks early. Unless you're a tank, then you can drop your stacks at 2 and it's good. So yeah, I really like Windrunner Spire. I don't like the Derelict Duo wing. That wing in particular feels like kind of just clunky. The pulls aren't very big. The trash feels like over punishing. Bosses generally feel pretty good in here. I like the pull size through the rest. While it is a 4-boss dungeon, it is a shorter timer and it's fairly fast paced, and they've gotten rid of the RP elements, mostly. If you do this on like normal, the time it takes to actually like get through the dungeon takes a lot longer, because you don't have all these like the portals opening take longer. You have to like channel certain relics and weapons after each boss fight, and they've mostly like kind of like alleviated that from Mythic Plus. They've gotten rid of it. They've totally dissected it out and put it into just normal for like the lower side, and then for Mythic Plus, it's pretty sped up. So yeah, moving on. Last but not least, we have my personal favorite. This video is getting pretty long, so I don't want to waste too much time. Maisara Caverns. This dungeon is great. Starting off the dungeon, you have a couple of these berserker mobs that are pretty scary. Basically, they hit the tank really hard in terms of melee, but the other problem is that they like heal over time. They just have a buff. It can't be removed. It can't be anything. It's just like they heal. So they take a little bit longer to kill. You have these soul eaters that like apply necrotic wave, which just basically is like a healing absorb. They do rain of toads, very like troll-esque, very voodoo-y. You have axe throwers, which are going to try to root people and just throw axes at random players. And then you have bears that do crunch armor, which makes you take more damage. And then you have just some laborers who just do melees. So that's most of the trash in this first area. You can do a really, really, really big first pull here. You can select certain mobs as your priority target, whether it's the kind of like the necromancer guy at the start, forgot the name of it. You can pull in a mammoth, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, pretty big dungeon. My one qualm is like freeing the prisoners is always kind of cringe. I've talked about this in Pit of Sauron, but what I like about this dungeon versus Pit of Sauron is that you have to free 8 laborers total, and there's like 20. So you can kind of pick and choose where you want to go to like free them. You can go left, you can go right, you can kind of go left and then go back right. You can skip past stuff. There's like good routing options in here. Now there's a couple of mobs that are a little bit cursed. Right now we have a Hex Guardian. It's like just a totem mask that's like spewing out fire. And it's going to pick like one random player every like 20 seconds or 30 seconds and fire a giant beam. It's indicated by this giant red laser. That player needs to use a defensive, or you get one shot at this level. So it's a little cursed, but if you have good prio or good defensive usage, it's a good mob to kind of pull in here. Anyways, most of the trash around here is going to remain the same. There are these hulking juggernauts, these giant like mammoth guys that do a nasty like bleed on the tank. You want to be fairly careful of them, called Rending Gore. Besides that, it's like pretty chill. You're going to be able to pull pretty large in this area because there's like a lot of like little like laborers and stuff. Now you do want to be careful of knockbacks because you can actually just fucking send some guys. And then there's like some hexers, like they cast Shadow Bolt. Besides that, it's like not super crazy. They also cast Hex, which can be a little annoying to deal with. But outside of that, yeah, it's a pretty chill start to the dungeon. There's a couple of hard pulls, but you can like mix it up on which labor camps you want to pull based on like your group, based on your coordination level. But as you can see, we're like generally pulling pretty big. And it just feels like a challenging dungeon. Like a lot of the other dungeons, you pull really big, but it doesn't feel like it's actually challenging you. Where this dungeon feels, it's like challenging but rewarding, if that makes sense. Anyways, once you free 8 camps, you'll actually be ready to head down to the first boss, which is a 2-target cleave encounter. It's like a survival hunter fight. You have Murojin and Necrax, his pets. This fight looks really hectic, and I've had a lot of people make comments about it, but I don't think it's that challenging. Basically, you have 2 bosses that have rotating mechanics. So first, you have Murojin, who's going to disengage and then do a tank buster. Then, the other boss, the bird, is going to apply a disease to your entire group. You don't need a disease spell for this. It's just a little bit of rot damage. If you have a disease spell, it's probably your most effective global, but if not, just healers are going to fight. Then it goes back to the hunter, the Murojin. He's going to spawn traps. Then it's going to go back to the bird. The bird's going to then do like circles on the ground. Then it's going to go back to Murojin, who's going to do barrage on a random player. This player is going to get constantly slowed. Um, can be removed by Dispel or something like, Tiger's Lust or Freedom. And then finally, the bird will then try to charge a player. That player needs to walk into a trap to become frozen in a block of ice, which then the bird will charge that player, break, and then get stunned. And that's it. It's 6 mechanics. It looks hectic. It's really not. It's a 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. The bosses rotate which mechanic is going on, and it's the same order every time. After the charge, the hunter then disengages. So it's disengage, dot, traps, circles, freezing, or step, charge, and trap. That's it. It's good. Or barrage and then trap. My bad. I really like this encounter, and I think it's the easiest one of the bunch, and it's pretty fun. Who doesn't like 2-target cleave, besides everyone? My only qualm with this dungeon, honestly, is this part right here. Like, this run sucks. I don't like when there's a lot of time you spend running from, like, boss room to next pull. But once you're in this area, you will unlock a waystone eventually, which is kind of nice. And the trash in here is pretty fun and pretty chill. You have these skirmishers who have absorb shields on them. They can be purged off, but when they are purged, what ends up happening is they blow up. Right? I think it's maybe when they die. I don't remember. It's one of the two. There's a couple of casters, a couple of melee mobs, and then this giant Gnarldin, who just does like a big tank slime. Pretty chill. Make sure you're kicking spirit bolts. Every bolt that gets missed, or not kicked, it'll do a little bit of damage and apply a dot, which is kind of cool. I like this version of casters compared to like regular bolts that have been like one-shotting people in previous seasons. These style of bolts are kind of nice. It's like if you kick it, great. If you miss the kick, it's not going to one-shot anyone and applies a dot, which that means the healer can counter with the Dispel, which also is technically like a kick almost kind of in a way. Now, when these soldiers die, they do this like reanimation thing, which means that they'll reanimate if you, so the idea is that you want to kick it or stun it. The mini boss that we have pulled, Engage with, he does like this little like vacuum suck, and then he tries to do a ritual sacrifice, and he'll put a player on the altar in the middle. The way you counter that is just either break the person out of the root, or you can use things like Freedom, Tiger's Lust, Post Haste, Vengeful Retreat. Any way to remove like root effects or snare effects will allow you to get out of it. Very, very simple. And so this entire area is basically just a bunch of different variations of those mobs outside of the mini boss that we're doing. Now, one other thing in this area that's really cool is there is a non-recipe requiring or non-like profession requiring event. And so if you light all the incenses around the room, there's 2 on either side, it'll actually spawn a healthy man, a helping man, who will basically do a little bit of damage and then he'll actually do a ramping damage taken increase to a priority target, which is super nice. So it'll help you kind of dispatch some of these mobs a little bit quicker, which is a little convenient. So yeah, we have shades, we got some guys who do AoE, we have some guys who do roots, and that's how we're gonna play basically for the rest of the run here. Now, unfortunately, there is a kind of a weird problem with certain spell effects pulling mobs in the air. There's these bats. These bats get called down. I think it's mostly the issue that I've had is mostly Devour, Demon Hunters, and Frost Mages will pull these bats. I don't know what abilities specifically, but basically anything that's up in the air, I believe it's I-Beam, has like an infinite vertical axis. And so when those mobs get pulled down, we end up like wiping here, and they do this piercing screech. They don't give a lot of percent, and they pretty much can kill your group pretty quickly. So you do want to be a little careful. I think Blizzard should really fix that and make them like either not targetable at all and just have them like kind of flying around as like a visual effect, or fix the fucking game and make it so that I-Beam and Blizzard isn't randomly pulling mobs. GG. Anyways, we're gonna get into the second boss fight, and probably one of my favorite boss fights of the entire encounter. There's so many unique strategies to this boss, and I think people are still trying to figure it out. It's probably pretty comp dependent, but basically the whole premise of the fight is that she's going to spawn 4 ads. These ads are going to fixate random players, and it's the players' goals to kind of like untangle the mobs, and then you want to like have them connect with each other to blow up, and that when they blow up, it leaves a dot on your party. Now, they are CCable, they are like knockable. And so you might see like an evoker blowing a random guy onto our hunter who dies. So you can definitely grief, but you can also choose the option to have someone run into the mobs to basically soak them. So instead of getting 2 stacks, you're going to get just 1. You're going to just pop 1 at a time. You can do this with immunities, but for some reason, demon hunters can actually dash through them to pop without taking the debuff. Normally what happens is if you walk into an ad, you take like 300% more damage from said ad. So I'm going to try doing that here. You can see I took a ton of damage and I now have a debuff. But if you're quick enough with it, that just doesn't happen. So pretty cool. And then eventually she does that twice and then goes into an intermission where it's just basically bullet hell until you break and absorb. Earlier in the video, I talked about like the whole absorb break mechanic. I think it's cringe on mobs, but I think this is done really well. It would be nice if you got like a small damage increase after breaking the shield, or if she got stunned for a second or whatever. But ultimately, the bullet hell kind of phase is, I think, really, really fun. Because I just like bullet hells. I like dodging all around. So the fight basically just rinses and repeats. I think right now Devour Demon Hunters are a little busted because they can just like solo soak one at a time, which makes the healing check, I think, a little... Actually, I don't know if it's less terrible or not. Maybe a healer main can let me know down below. Is it easier to commit a cooldown to like 2 stacks? Or is it easier to just like raw dog heal 1 stack at a time? Not really sure, which is probably easier. But either way, it's a really cool encounter. Also, just like vibes. It's just fucking, it's sick. So finally, we have this like bridge you have to navigate down. I think the bridge is a little cringe. There's like shades that you have to kind of like kick. What I don't like about the bridge is that the main mechanic that makes the bridge cool is nullified by just walking to the side and then nothing hits you. So basically, you're going to see these like giant hands or these giant orbs like kind of smashing down. If you get caught in the kind of the orb and it smashes on you, you're probably dead or you're taking a lot of damage. But if you just walk to the side, it never hits you, so you never have to actually worry about it. So kind of dumb in my opinion, but that's okay. Blizzard could technically fix this or just like make it not really do a lot of damage, and maybe it just like silences you or something, and then it would be like a little less annoying. But basically the final thing that you end up doing here is you have to, in order to stop the hands, you have to make it all the way up the stairs and kill Zildjian, the drummer. Now, this guy, once you get close enough to him, he starts doing a ton of damage through his ritual drum channel. Now, he doesn't melee, so you could just like, you technically don't even need a tank here to kill him. But he just does a ton of AoE damage. Anyways, luckily I was someone who's very smart, grabbed a bat for us, so we were able to get our last percent without having to run back. And then we're heading into the final boss, Raktul. Now, this fight is so sick. So the fight starts off with him doing a tank buster on the tank. It's going to be like, it's called Spirit Breaker. It does like 3 animations of like slam, slam, and then pow. On the final hit, it leaves a giant pool underneath the tank. So the tank ideally wants to try to run out of the group. Now, it does knock you back, but luckily when I'm playing a Brewmaster, I'm able to counter that pretty easily. Then he's going to target 3 players with arrows over their head in a like kind of sequential order. Now, those players, when they're leapt on, will spawn totems. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, the players try to get as close as possible so the totems are stacked so the boss can be on top of them and then everything gets cleaved down. If you spread out too far, it's going to be really hard to kill the totems. The totems do like just like damage to the player that they're linked to. And if any of them are live when you go into the intermission, you pretty much will wipe. So right here is like a really good drop example. We're able to cleave the boss down. The Spirit Breaker cast is coming off. I'm going to roll backwards, get out, and then dash to counter the knockback. Now we're going to go into the intermission here, and the intermission is kind of, I don't want to say stolen from Fellowship, but there's a boss in Fellowship that works very, 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 very similar to this in the Pirate Cove dungeon or whatever. Anyways, you get ported to the start of the bridge. There's a couple of mobs you want to CC on your way back. Every mob you kick, interrupt, CC will give you a damage done increase, healing increase, and movement speed increase. And as you can see, if you step in any of this, kind of like the ghost men, you get rooted. If you get rooted, obviously it's going to slow you down. You want as much time for the burn as possible. Now, there is some strategy where you have the tank stay back and then you interrupt one of the spirits at like the last second to just extend the buff. But I believe the buff also goes away when this channel ends. I'm not quite sure. What's cool about this fight though is you get a nice big damage boost of like 150%. I think it's 25% per interrupted ad, I believe. I might have to check that, but basically massive damage amp. So the boss looks very scary, but generally you'll kill him in 2 burns. So while it does feel like a long fight, I think it's interactive enough to make it feel pretty good. I think this is a very well-designed fight. I think it's a really well-designed dungeon. Thematically, it's super sick. I really like this kind of like necrotic green. Reminds me a lot of like Bwansamdi, who may or may not be coming back this expansion with some of like the data mine, not data mine, but like leaked shit that people have been like finding in new zones with like the Loas and shit. So anyways, really good fight, really good dungeon. Maisara is probably my favorite out of the four. Even though the bosses are really hard, I think that the dungeon is just really challenging in a lot of cool, unique, interesting ways. Anyways, I don't want to keep ranting. It is getting late. This video is like nearly an hour long. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to edit it down. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of the dungeons. I have some pretty interesting videos planned. Obviously, with like future changes, we're going to be talking about those, but I have like another limit test that I am currently editing and working on. So stay tuned for that. Anyways, I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.